Alright everyone, welcome back to the channel, and today we have a very long awaited video for you guys to enjoy. We actually have the power rankings here for season 2 of the GLCC. I am going to be covering the Ever Grande City division, and if you're interested in seeing the rankings for our other division, which is the Indigo Plateau division, they will be up on S Master's channel, which you can find in the description below as always. Go ahead and check that out if you're curious, and go ahead and drop bro a subscription as well. And yeah, let's just go ahead and jump straight into the rankings. Now, just a bit of a disclaimer before we jump headfirst into the rankings. This is not at all weighted by anything here. I don't weigh anything like the ability of the coaches or how I feel about the coaches as people or anything like that in these rankings. These are purely just my opinions on the teams that were drafted, and again, they have absolutely zero weight. I don't expect that this will hold true for anything like standings after the regular season, or even standings after playoffs, where we see who the champion of the GLCC Season 2 is going to be. These are just, again, my very objective opinions. They're not right, they're not wrong, they're just my opinions. Anyways, I think you guys all understand what I'm trying to say here, so let's just go ahead and jump straight into the rankings. And we will start things off here with Life's Hell, the coach of the Frozen Oshawotts, who have elected to pick up a Monotype normal team. And normal is one of those types that I expected to not really have a super broken draft by any means. Like, sure, you get your pick of an Ursaluna form, and then you get your guaranteed Terapagos down the line. But I just sort of expected that it would struggle to find a lot of very pressuring middle and bottom tier options. And I think that overall that turned out to be the case here with Life's Hell's team. I will say that they have shown that the team and the type overall are very usable. Offensively, I really like this team, as it does quite alright in terms of the special department here with the Ursaluna Blood Moon, as well as the Terapagos, and also the Meloetta as well. And we do have some decent physical pressure as well from the likes of that Terra Regigigas, as well as the Sheer Force Braviary that was picked up. And the Terra Regigigas in particular, I think, is not going to be super duper hard in a monotype environment to get it out of slow start. And especially since you can Terra it into either the poison or the fairy type, definitely if it's not well prepared for by the opponents, I think that Pokemon can put in a lot of work. I do also like the Grafaiai pickup from this team, as it can be both very fast and offensive with Swords Dance and Unburden. It can also rock out with like a supportive set. It has moves like Parting Shot, Knockoff, and Encore. In terms of hazards, there's about as many hazards as normal can realistically muster. You have Rocks on Blissey, and then every hazard and every move in the game on Smeargle. And for removing hazards, we have Rapid Spin on Terapagos, as well as Defog on Braviary. And as for having options to deal with weaknesses, which is something else that we love to see on a monotype team, there are a number of fighting type switch-ins, the most defensive of which are probably going to be the Frigiraffe pre-Terra, and then also the Regigigas once it Terras into either Poison or Fairy once again. However, I do think that despite this surprising amount of strengths for the normal team, I do believe that this team does not exactly represent the best possible normal squad. Firstly, if possible, I think that the normal team would absolutely love to have a Zoroark Hisui on it. Sadly for Life's Hell, this time around it was actually sniped by the Ghost team, so he is missing that pivotal piece, which is unfortunate for him. Not his fault by any means for not grabbing it, that's just how things played out. Another thing that this team doesn't have is very much speed control. As I said, Grafaiai can be very fast, but aside from it, there's not too much immediately fast threats to take advantage of. Terapagos can, of course, run Rock Polish and become a dangerous sweeper. Frigiraffe also gets agility, I think. Yeah, it does. And there are a number of good Choice Scarf users as well on the team. But just looking at the stats of the Pokemon, the fastest Pokemon that does immediate damage without any sort of like setting up or any sort of gimmicky strat like that, like Regigigas's, The fastest Pokemon that is immediate in its damage is going to be Meloetta, and it's only base 90. Another thing to note is that this team lacks a lot of momentum. If I'm not mistaken, the only Pokemon here with pivoting moves are Grafaiai, Meloetta, Braviary, Farigiraf, and Smeargle, if you count Smeargle. Blissey and Snorlax in particular are huge momentum sinks for this team. Blissey lost Teleport coming into this generation, which was really, really unfortunate for it. As a result, I think that it's going to be difficult for this team to position itself in winning positions, as Ursaluna Blood Moon and Terapagos and Regigigas all kind of really want to rely on strong positioning in order to set up and be the potential win cons on this team. In addition, I feel like Arboliva in particular doesn't feel like it has a role here that it's like actively satisfying anything by being on the team. It pretty much just overlaps with Blood Moon and Farigiraf as slow special attackers, and again, I want to touch on like the Blissey Snorlax combo, which are both Spadef walls, and they don't make a lot of progress on their own, and together on the same team they're just very, very redundant. Another thing I'm not too sure on is the Terra types here. Out of the 4 Terra types, I think that only one of them really makes sense, and that's Poison on Regigigas. I find it particularly puzzling that after missing out on the Hisuian Zoroark, this team doesn't even have a Ghost type Terra captain. You can get that fighting immunity through the Terra types rather, instead of just banking on the Hisuian Zoroark, but instead this team doesn't have that. I think another potential improvement could be reintroducing Cyclizar to this team, as not only does it provide more speed on an otherwise slow-paced team, but it's also a remover, which would free up Terapagos to run other sets, like the setup Calm Mind Rock Polish Stored Power set could probably do a lot of work, since this is Monotype and not every type has a Dark type team, or rather, not every team has a Dark type on it. It would also just act as like a good utility Pokemon in terms of just having knockoff, and it would also act as a pivot, which is another thing I think that this team kind of needs and enjoys having. I also think that maybe it would be good to pick up a Pokemon such as Mousehold or Chinchino, as there is certainly a lack of strong physical pressure on this team when compared to the special pressure just looking at the lineup, and both of these Pokemon can set up with Tidy Up, which also doubles as another form of removal if you do count that as well. However, again, I do feel like this team is very, very usable, and even though it is unfortunately ranked last this season, if certain threats are not going to be prepped for by the opponents, such as that Blood Moon Ursaluna or the Terra Regigigas, this team can definitely pick up some wins on this season. Now moving on to the 13th spot, we have Curb, coach of the Korok Space Program and their Monotype Water team this season. Meme picks aside, there's a lot of really good Pokemon here. We have offensive threats like Protean or Battle Bond as well on Greninja. We also have Walking Wake, Dragon Dance Gyarados, Shell Smash on Blastoise as well, and Huge Power Azu, Adaptability Crawdaunt, like the list goes on. Crawdaunt is a particular Pokemon as well for having a very, very strong Aqua Jet. Azumarill as well has this, but yeah, just having this really nice priority option is really, really good for this team. And there's also like Water Shuriken Gren, which could be clutch as well. We do also have Pokemon like Walking Wake and Blastoise and Lantern, and the Slowking as well, who are more likely going to be your primary defensive pieces on this team. And they all have some form of momentum, which is great to get your offensive pieces in positions to do damage or to click setup moves and then do damage. Blastoise in particular is a great supportive piece for this team, I feel, and I expect that it will certainly be able to pull its weight throughout the season with access to supportive moves like Yawn, Rapid Spin, and Flip Turn. There is also some counterplay to grass types and to electric types. A bulky Azu can run Sap Sipper as well to beat the grass types, and then Lantern obviously has that Volt Switch. Sadly, there are some things still to critique about this team. Firstly, the speed tiers aren't the best on this team, as there's a really big gap. It goes from 109, which is walking wake speed, to 81, which is Gyarados' speed, as the next fastest. And so a lot of Pokemon that go up against this team are going to be able to afford to run damage boosting natures for free. Another very weak point of this team is the hazard setting capabilities, as sadly your only rocker is going to be Wooper, which as great as the Wooper pick is, it honestly won't get much done in most matchups, because all it's going to do is just set up Stealth Rocks and then die or something like that. Aside from Wooper, I'm pretty sure that the only other hazards on this team is going to be Greninja, which has access to both Spikes and T-Spikes. But firstly, again, there's no Ghost type on this team to spin block for the Greninja, or for the Wooper, I guess. I think that Greninja in particular is also probably not going to be setting a lot of spikes in general. 99% of the time, it's probably going to be forced to run an offensive set here due to its very offensive stat spread. So that's probably a pretty unfortunate problem for this team, is that there's no real good hazards or spin blocking. Greninja, as good of a Pokemon it is, it can't carry this team on its back. Unfortunately, it has surprisingly low attack and special attack. I believe its attack is only 95 and its special is 103. So really underwhelming stats given the Gen 9 standards that have really inflated a lot of Pokemon. Walking Wake also relies on a one-time use booster energy to accomplish its maximum output of damage, and that's only if you want to run booster special attack every week, which isn't always what you want to do, considering sometimes you'll either want to booster speed, or you'll want to use a defensive set instead with leftovers or AV or something like that. I think that since it's neutral to grass and electric moves, this is a pretty good option on it as well. I do also think that in a similar vein, an offensive Blastoise won't be able to come as often as you'd like, just due to the fact that it's the only spinner on the team, which is unfortunate, given that Water has a lot of really good spinning options to choose from. In addition to Blastoise, you have things like Quaquaval, Tatsugiri, Tentacruel, and without the presence of any other rapid spinners, Blastoise is probably going to be more so forced into a supportive role rather than a shell smash offense role. And I do think that if the Blastoise does take on an offensive role, this team is probably going to be pretty weak to Stealth Rocks, as the only resist to Stealth Rocks is, again, Wooper. And since there's no Poison type here on the team, it's also quite weak to Toxic Spikes, unless Terra Poison Wooper comes every week. Wooper is proving to be pretty important on this team, but overall, just not the best counterplay to hazards, setting them or removing them or preventing the ones on your opponent's side from being removed. Just really not the most ideal play there. I think another vein that the team sort of struggles with is going to be the fact that there's a few key resists missing. There's no fairy resist to support the offensive pieces, and keep in mind that Greninja, Walking Wake, Crawdont, they're all weak to fairy, and so having no poison type resists is really unfortunate for that department. There's also no poison attack resists, which kind of beat up on the Azu as well as the Ludicolo. Again, besides Wooper, I guess Wooper resists poison. In hindsight, I really think that this team could probably benefit from the presence of Empoleon, as not only does it fix the fairy and poison weaknesses, but it also gives this team another rocker besides Wooper, which, as good as Wooper is, again, you're going to want another rocker most likely. I think another good option maybe is going to be Swampert. It gets rocks, it also resists poison, and I think maybe a third Pokemon that this team could consider picking up is going to be that guaranteed Manaphy that was passed up on I'm assuming just for kicks, so you could get Wooper as well as the Mudkip. But you can't deny that Manaphy would probably be an upgrade from a competitive perspective here. Overall, though, again, this team is a really, really big improvement from what the Korok Space Program drafted last season. And despite some aspects of it, still needing that improvement, as mentioned, at its core, I feel like it checks a lot of the boxes that make a GLCC draft team good. It has a good mix of offensive and defensive pieces. It has really, really good momentum. It has some strong priority options as well, and also has some means of answering those type disadvantages, which you definitely need on a monotype team. So again, very, very vast improvements from Curb since last season, so I'm very interested to see them play again in this season. And next up, we will move on to our pick for the 12th strongest team this season, and it's going to be coached by Arch, the Area Zero Archers, and they have elected to pick up a Monotype ground team. This team has a lot of really, really amazing physical attackers. That's like the first thing that jumps out to me as I look at it. The only Pokemon on this team that doesn't have an attack stat with 3 digits is, I believe, the Gastrodon, which is just absurd. However, though, the special output is a lot less threatening, given that it's pretty much just Landorus, and Gastrodon isn't normally going to be EV'd as an offensive threat. But Landorus does, in fact, have Nasty Plot, so you can't just ignore it in the builder if you're going up against this team. Defensively, we have the Gastrodon again, we have a Tinglu, Hippowdon, Terra Mudsdale with stamina as well. You're super set to eat a lot of physical attacks, and with Tinglu's Vessel of Ruin ability, it can definitely be trained to take a lot of special hits as well. But overall, just looking at the team, I think that if you were weaker in one of the defenses, it's almost certainly going to be special defense, so that's probably something to keep in mind. Like, all of your Spadef capabilities are sort of tied to Tinglu, and once it goes down, it can open up a game for Special Sweeper on the opponent's team. I will say I do also like the Alolan Dugtrio here, as it has the Sand Force ability and can set up in sand somewhat similarly to Excadrill, and plus with the 110 speed tier, it gives the team some very much appreciated speed, as normally ground teams are quite slow without abusing like a triple scarf bleed all style build. So you gotta appreciate the Dougie for being there and being fast. I also like Mamoswine here as well. It can deal with the grass types that your team generally doesn't like. It can also run like Ice Shard, and Ice Shard really hurts coming off of that. I believe it's 130 base attack stat on Mamoswine. And so unless you have an opponent that resists it, Ice Shard is probably a very, very reliable way to revenge a lot of Pokemon. As for Hazard Stack, you have 3 solid spikers. Yeah, you have like 3 spikers and probably like 10 rockers. So this team is super fine in that department, which is always helpful for getting stuff into range for Landorus and for Excadrill. As for some improvements to this team overall, the first thing I will say is that I don't really love the Terra Captains. Terra Mudsdale's okay, but it can probably be easily forced out by like 1 or 2 special hits, or like a Stray Whirlwind or Haze or something like that, clearing its stamina buffs. And I think that while it's trying to soak up some hits, it doesn't really do a whole lot back to the opponent. Not a lot of offensive pressure in that department, but Mudsdale's not the real problem that I have here with the Terra Captains. It's actually going to be that Camerupt. I do think there is a world maybe where I get proven wrong here, and Terra Camerupt shows its worth in some games, as realistically one of the main things that holds this Pokemon back is its absolutely atrocious typing, which it can obviously Terra out of. But firstly, I think that the Terra types on it aren't very good. I don't really like Terra Fire, since your only remover on the team is Excadrill, which, it is a good spinner. It's a great spinner, in fact. But that means you're sacrificing a movesaw on the drill for Rapid Spin, which isn't always ideal. And as a result, I think that if the Camerupt tears into the Fire type especially, it's still going to be weak to those rocks, which isn't very ideal, to be frank. And that's because of the absolutely atrocious defensive stats on it. That's the second thing I don't like about this, is its bulk spread is quite literally, I looked into this, 70 HP, 70 defense, 75 speed F, and I don't trust a guy like that to live more than like 2 hits, even with Terra. And so again, like the Terra Fire is probably going to get some super strong eruptions and things like that, but you know, eruption relies on the user's HP being very high to do a lot of damage, and when Camerupt simply folds most of its HP after like 1 attack, I can't justify in my mind it doing a lot for this team. Again, I guess there's a world where I'm proven wrong here, but you know, I just don't see it. I also think that it's very sad that there's absolutely no momentum on this team. I'm pretty sure the only momentum pieces here are going to be U-turn on Flygon. Flygon is a good option for momentum. I think that Landorus also gets momentum, but it obviously doesn't want to run it. It wants to be the Pokemon that's switched into rather than the one that's doing the switching, if that makes sense. And then I know I mentioned Flygon already, but like if you want to run a Dragon Dance cleaning set, then you probably also don't want U-turn on that all of the time. And so really having that lack of momentum means it's going to be really tough to get Pokemon like Drill, like Lando, like Dragon Dance Flygons in positions to break offensively. So that's very, very unfortunate. As a result of this, I think the defensive line is going to have a lot of pressure on it to hold the line and not get broken. And we all know that defense in this gen is really, really terrible. So I don't have a lot of faith in that department, and you know, sadly that's just the reality of building with the ground type. It's just simply very limited with its options and limited with its speed tiers, which is unfortunate for Arch here. But again, I do see the team getting a lot of wins throughout the regular season, and I can definitely see it making into the playoffs with some good play as well. And you know, again, I just want to clarify that if Terra Camerupt proves me wrong, then so be it. Maybe that guy's really, really good, but I just can't trust him yet. Alrighty, and now on to our pick for the 11th strongest team. It's going to be Heil Hydra, which is coached by not Kai, and this time they picked up a Monotype Ghost team for Season 2. Off rip, we have the king of Draft League in Dragapult on this team, and Pult is followed up by some other very, very strong Pokemon like Spectrier and Gengar in the special department, and we have other solid options like Basculegion Male here for some physical damage, which you love to see, and there's even Hisui and Zoroark as well for some mind gaming, which can always come in clutch. And then even for a type as spammable as Ghost, we have a really good selection of Pokemon here in the back. As a defensive line, you know, we have Skeledirge in particular. As much as it probably is going to be pressured to bring heavy-duty boots every single week, it's a really good unaware wall with access to Slack Off for immediate healing and Will-O-Wisp to absolutely cripple those physical attackers. And then we also have Torch Song as well, the Snowball, if it isn't dealt with. So that's a pretty good defensive option for this team. We also have some other pieces here, like Terra Palisand, who I've seen firsthand put in a lot of work. There's also that Sinistra, which can burn opponents as well, and it can heal up with its signature attack, Macha Gotcha. And Spiritomb here isn't bad either in any regard, which is cool too. This team didn't opt to lean super duper heavy into the hazard department, which I'm personally okay with on a team like this, since Ghost is like such a spammable type regardless. Meaning that this stuff can naturally be chipped into range of Pult or Spec for an endgame. And then we do also have this Terra Drifblim as our main remover here with Defog. Perhaps a Brambleghast pick would have been nice, since that guy does get spikes, as well as Rapid Spin, which would add a new dimension to the team with more of a hazard game. But overall, I don't hate Mono Drifblim Defog as the only removal option, to be frank. There's also a ton of cool priority options as well. A lot of Sucker Punch users, a lot of Shadow Sneak users as well, obviously being on the Ghost team, and that's pretty cool as well to have in order to get chip that Dragapult and that Spectre are going to love. On to some of the negatives with this team. I think that the first thing that I'm noticing here, and I'm probably going to sound like a broken record throughout the video, to be honest, but it's going to be the lack of momentum again. To my knowledge, the only momentum moves here are going to be U-turn on Zoroark and Dragapult, which again, those two Pokemon are probably two Pokemon that you want to switch into rather than switch out of most of the time. And we do also have Baton Pass on Drifblim if I remember correctly, but I'm pretty sure that's it beyond that. There just isn't really a lot to offer in terms of acquiring positioning, which is something that this team could really benefit from. There's also a pretty large speed tier gap, which I'm not a huge fan of. We have 110 on Gengar, and I think also 110 on Zoroark, but then the next fastest is going to be 85 on Mischievous, and if you don't count Mischievous, then the next real Pokemon is Terra Drifblim at 80. So there you go. Another thing while we're on the topic of Drifblim is I'm not a huge fan of the Terra types on it. It did sound like Kai was cooking something special up, so maybe I just don't understand it. Like, he's on a different plane of existence. But overall, I feel like these two types, it doesn't really provide a lot of offensive pressure, which is what I'm assuming a Drifblim would oftentimes more so like to do when it is a Terra captain. Obviously, if you want a defensive Terra captain, I think that the Palossand is probably the much better bream. And if you want an offensive Terra captain, then the Drifblim. That's just my assumption. Personally, I think that Terra Fairy is a lot better on Dark, since it allows you to offensively pressure the Dark types, which you naturally struggle with since you're a Ghost team. You also get to pressure Dragon types, and just looking through this team, it has no Steel types, and then Mimikyu's also missing, which is unfortunate. And so overall, this team is super duper weak to Dragon attacks. There's 0 resists overall, so the Dragon team's probably going to have a field day when it fights this, except for Dragapult, I guess, can Revenge, and Spectrier gets Draining Kiss. But overall, it's just very, very hard to have 0 switch-ins to a specific type. And just looking through this team, maybe there's other types as well. Yeah, I mean, there's Dragon, like I just mentioned. What's your Rock resist? What's your Flying resist? What's your Ice resist? And obviously, this is Monotype. Not every team is going to have like an absolutely perfect defensive type chart, because it's just impossible when all of your Pokemon are the same type and you're so limited to that. Like even Fairy as well. I mean, I guess you have Skeledirge and Gengar, but yeah, maybe not Fairy now that I'm thinking about it, but yeah, there's a lot of types overall that you're unnecessarily weak to. Ghost is only weak to Ghost itself and Dark, but in reality, this team is weak to Dragon, Rock, Flying, and Ice. Yeah, so that's a little bit unfortunate that you have so many extra weaknesses, I think. But onto, again, the overall review for the team. There's a lot of special pressure here offensively, which is good again. And there's some very, very nice defensive pieces, which is outstanding for a Ghost team like this. However, I think the lack of momentum pieces and a lack of weaknesses to random typings, maybe being a little bit too passive, in the hazard removal as well as the hazard setting department. There's just some holes here that could be covered, and then if they are covered, it would probably make for a much, much stronger Ghost team than the already pretty strong one, but just imperfect one that is already built here. And now moving on to number 10, we have the Cerulean Edge, once again coached by Mountain Man, and this time the Cerulean Edge opted to pick up a Steel type team. And let's see, it's now time to talk about the first ever Steel type team drafted in GLCC. So as a result, maybe my knowledge of how this team may or may not work is probably going to be pretty limited, and I'm not too certain about anything really that I'm going to be saying, but I guess here goes nothing. As for some pros that I see, there is amazing defensive pressure, obviously. I'm pretty sure that every Pokemon on this team, other than maybe Sandslash/Alola, probably has a defensive set that is commonly utilized. This is absolutely amazing for the Steel type, as given the nature of the type and just the nature of the team, without the right tools, I think that many teams are going to have so much trouble just breaking through, which is really, really good news, especially when you have as many like means to get around the steel type's weaknesses here, like Bronzong, for example, with access to both levitate and heat proof. We have Skarmory and Fortress being ground answers. Then there's let's see, the Terra Water and the Fire Pokemon as well, to answer fire types. And then we do also have some covers for the fighting types. Again, it's going to be that Skarmory and that Fortress, and as well we have a Terra Fairy Captain, all to answer those fighting types. So just overall really good ways to cover up weaknesses here for this team. I think another thing to note is the amazing hazard options on this team. Like, just look at all the ways that hazards can go up on this team. There's 11 total Pokemon on this team, and 8 of them, if I'm not miscounting, get either Stealth Rocks or Spikes, and that is amazing. As this is like compounded by the fact that we have the best removal denier in the game in Goldengo as our first overall pick here. And just look at all of the options. There's so many options, and like in terms of like removing hazards on your own side, we have Iron Treads. Iron Treads is probably like one of the most consistent rapid spinners in the game, and seeing as it may be needed for offensive roles on a team like this, what do we have in the back? We have 2 more spinners. We have Fortress and Alolan Sandslash. It's truly beautiful, the amount of hazard control this team has at its disposal. There's absolutely no other team that can win a hazard stack war against a squad unless Goldengo goes down early somehow or something like that. So another thing that I enjoy about this team is its surprisingly decent amount of momentum moves. Normally I would think that steel types are by nature much more of a momentum sink type, but there are 3 really good pivots here. We have Fortress, Iron Hands, and Magneton. Or I'm sorry, did I say Iron Hands? I meant Iron Treads. There's no Iron Hands on the Monotype Steel team. But anyways, now that I say it, if it doesn't like a crap ton of momentum, but it's super duper important for having for a team like this that's going to be pivoting a lot to get those defensive Pokemon in. It's also going to be very important for a team like this because it causes a lot of switches on the opponent's part. And yeah, I feel like it's pretty good overall, just having those 3 really strong momentum options. Another boon, I think, of Magneton in particular on this team is since it's a Terra Captain, not only can you like trap and then work on removing opposing steel types that are looking to resist your entire offense, but with Terra, this Pokemon can become like a pretty potent offensive threat, I bet. It can probably like break oftentimes, especially if you like just slap a Choice Scarf on that bad boy. He's probably going to be able to claim a lot of kills in a lot of games just by outspeeding, and then with Terra removing its 4 times weakness to ground. Pretty huge overall for this team. Unfortunately, I guess this probably segues into the thing that I'm the most afraid of for this team as well. It's going to be like the fact that I said slap a Choice Scarf on that guy. I mean, the speed tiers here for this team, there's not many holes, but the entire team as a whole is just really slow, and that's probably just a nature of this of the steel type. The fastest Pokemon here is going to be Iron Treads, which can maybe be manageable considering it can run like booster speed. But realistically, this team is very slow, and I think regardless of the matchup, there's probably going to be a Pokemon on the opposite team that can simply outspeed the rest of the team, which you don't really like to see when you're banking on defense as your strongest offense. And again, just things like Magneton can effectively run Choice Scarf, but it's still unfortunate that you have to just rely on that item. There are only 2 traditionally damage dealing Pokemon on this team. I would say that they are Goldengo and Kingambit. They can certainly pack a punch, but my main issue with them is that they are very slow again. There's, I guess, a possibility for like Supreme Overlord, Swords Dance, Sucker Punch, Kingambit to just clean every single endgame ever and out-prioritize other forms of damage, but realistically, I don't think that it's very possible to rely on that for every single endgame, but maybe I'm wrong. Iron Treads and Magneton in particular are probably going to have to really step up their game offensively in order for this team to pressure and eventually get some wins. Overall, though, I really like this team. I think that it's a very, very interesting experiment since this is the first steel type team here, and it's in the hands of a very good builder. But overall, I think that because it's so like slow and defensive, which is generally, again, not something you love to see in Gen 9, it's probably going to be a little bit lower on this list here at position number 10. But yeah, I mean, again, very, very good defenses, very good answers to weaknesses, solid enough bulky offense options, I guess. And again, dare I say it, possibly the best hazard game plan of the entire league, let alone this division. So I'm very curious and interested to see how Mountain Man can pilot this team over the course of the season. And with that, we'll move on to the next one. All right, next up we have the Fantasia Cascadia taking the number 9 spot, coached by X, and this is a Monotype Fairy team. In my eyes, even without access to Enamorous, this Fairy team came out really, really nicely. Iron Valiant is, of course, one of the best mons in the draft format, and depending on the teams that it goes up against, it can probably just start spamming moves like Specs Moonblast or Banded Close Combats, and just claim 6 kills. On top of Val, I think there's also a lot of good Pokemon that enjoy its presence. For example, that Grimmsnarl that can set up screens, and that gives Val a chance to set up a Swords Dance or a Calm Mind. There's also a Terra Mimikyu here, which can set up pretty much free Swords Dances with its Disguise ability and then start sweeping from there. On the supportive side of things, this team has a very, very deep roster. We have removal in the form of Galarian Weezing. There's that Grimmsnarl again for screens and Thunder Wave and Trick and all the shit that Grimmsnarl can do. There's a Tinkaton as well, which has access to Stealth Rocks and Thunder Wave. There's a Diancie as well for more hazards, more special breaking pressure. And then we even have that Rabombi with the sticky webs that solidifies this team as I'm pretty sure this might be one of the only Monotype teams actually to have access to all 4 main types of hazards in Spikes, Stealth Rocks, T-Spikes, and Sticky Webs, so that's pretty hype. Anyways, we also have 2 specially bulky Pokemon in Primarina and Sylveon, and another Prankster Pokemon in Whimsicott. In terms of handling weaknesses, this team does pretty well at covering its bases, as Tinkaton and Primarina are 2 excellent steel neutralities here, and then we have Gweezing and Tinkaton and Mimikyu Pre-Terra and Diancie as well to cover the poison. So on top of that, our bulky Pokemon always all have the ways here to punish the switch-ins between momentum, like Flip Turn and Baton Pass on Primarina and Diancie respectively. And then we also have status options like Will-O-Wisp and Thunder Wave again on Galarian Weezing, and then Tinkaton and Grimmsnarl respectively, which is cool. As for some weaknesses, firstly, just to get an easy replacement off my chest, I think that Dedenne is absolute shit on this team, even with Terra. One of the main things that Dedenne likes to do is spread paralysis through abusing the move Nuzzle, and there's simply a better Pokemon on the board at doing this for Fairy, and that is Hatterene. Hatterene provides more than just Nuzzle support for the team as well. It is a Psychic type with a massive special attack stat, so that's going to offensively pressure the poison types that the Fairy type as a whole is not a huge fan of. And it also gets Magic Bounce to help Galarian Weezing out. And this is especially huge because this team has solid hazard stack potential, and it's a shame that the only way to remove hazards is going to be Geezing with Defog, which means that you remove hazards on your opponent's side of the field as well. Hatterene is a form of like pseudo removal that I think the Fairy team could really, really utilize here. Whimsicott and Sylveon are some of the other Pokemon on this team that I have a bit of a gripe with. Grimmsnarl is already a really, really great Prankster user, and I think that Whimsicott is a bit more on the redundant side as a result. On top of that, it speed ties with Iron Valiant, which, it's not the most useful in terms of fleshing out this team's holes and speed tiers that exist. There's a lot of holes here. I'm pretty sure there's a hole between Valiant and Mimikyu if you ignore the Diancie as well. And I think that there's also a hole between like Tinkaton and then... Wait, do we have 4 base 60s here? Oh, yeah, we have 4 base 60 here. I guess that leads me into my argument against Sylveon as well. It it simply doesn't accomplish much for the team. It's another special attacker that speed ties with now 3 other Pokemon, and overall I think that having Wish support on a team like this, which realistically the win con is going to be breaking and then Thunder Waving stuff, and then Valiant just sort of sets up and then claims an endgame, I really don't think the Wish support is that needed, to be honest. If a Wish passing is a dimension that like X wants to keep on his team, there's a much better Wish passer in general. I think that's going to be Screamtail. It's similar to Hatterene in that it's also a psychic type, which can help out against the matchups with poison. And then it's another spammer of very, very annoying moves. We have Taunt, Encore, and Thunder Wave all on Screamtail, and Sylveon doesn't get all of those options. And so I understand that, the points are tight and you make do with what you can get, but I think that a lack of like Hatterene in particular, and then like a pretty clumped speed tiers overall are quite detrimental to a team which otherwise is very, very strong. In my opinion, I can definitely see this team winning a considerable amount of games this season, and I'm excited to see how X can play with it. So with that, we'll just go ahead and slide into our next type. Alright, and next up we have my team, the Seattle Slashers, coached by yours truly, and again this time we went ahead and grabbed a poison type team. As for how poison type teams look, I think that I frankly have a team that's about as good as they come, to be honest. Maybe I'm gassing myself a little bit too much by saying that, but I have really good damage output in Sneasler and Iron Moth and Terra Revavroom, which is generally something that I think the poison type struggles with in damage output. I also have defensive pieces that are both present with healing moves as well as momentum moves. Namely, we have Glowking with Regenerator and Pecharunt as well, which has access to Recover. And then we also have other Pokemon to sort out my weaknesses, such as Weezing and Terra Vileplume and Qwilfish Hisui. I think that another really good boon of my team is the hazard control. I have 2 spinners in Tentacruel as well as Glimmora with Mortal Spin, which is great because since they are spinners, they will only clear hazards on my side of the field, which allows me to absolutely stack with Glimmora and Qwilfish and Ariados as well. They can go absolutely ham with the spikes and the rocks and the I guess I get all 4 hazards too, don't I? Oh, go me. Anyways, I think another really, really good boon with my hazard plan is Pecharunt has an absolutely massive defense stat, and it's probably going to be one of the premier spin blocking options in the entire format, and I'm really happy that I was able to pick it up. As for speed tiers, again, they're a little bit on the slower side overall, but I do have access to 2 very, very strong threats in Sneasler and also the Iron Moth. And they can go very, very fast. Both of them already have very, very strong, or rather very, very high base speeds. Sneasler hits 120, Iron Moth hits 110. Sneasler has the ability to also run Unburdened, so it'll outspeed like everything in the game. And then Iron Moth can also click Agility, or it can run Booster Speed. That's also another option for me. Terra Revavroom also offsets my speed a little bit since its main option for setup is going to be Shift Gear, which doubles its speed and it makes it pretty difficult to outpace it. However, again, I do know that my team, it's not perfect. Personally, I do think that the biggest flaw with my team is the absolute lack of priority options. One of the best ways to shut down speedy offense, which is pretty much what I have with Sneasler and Iron Moth, as I said, is to abuse strong priority moves. And since I don't have any strong priority moves of my own, I'm probably going to rely on my backline to hold the fort a little bit more often than I'd like, which is unfortunate. I also think that my roll compression is really, really bad here. When I was looking for ground neutralities, for example, the only thing I could feasibly afford with the amount of points I knew I was going to need is going to be that Terra Vileplume, and sadly I'm not too sure if I trust in Vileplume yet to be a defensive piece. I would have much rather preferred Amoonguss with Regenerator or Venusaur, which has access to knockoff in that slot. And because of these like small roll compression issues, I think it's going to be pretty difficult for me to always have an ideal 6 Pokemon I can bring to every matchup. I may have to choose like 6 out of an ideal 7 or 8, which is it's never easy, and it's also never fun. It's not an easy choice to make by any means. So in order to improve my team, I think I would probably just first swap in the Amoonguss or Venusaur, but that would mean I have to drop some of my other pieces, such as the Terra Vileplume, or the Ariados, and maybe even like Weezing or Quillfish, which, you know, that's not really possible for my team given the position that I'm aware that I'm in. So it's a little bit unfortunate there. Another few Pokemon I think I would have really loved to have on my team would be like Clodsire with Stab Earthquakes as well, and then just being an unaware wall. I think I also would have enjoyed Alolan Muck because it has good priority in Shadow Sneak, and then again it also has that dark typing, which helps out a monotype poison team a lot. But you know, I think that I run into the same issues, so I'm just gonna run with these Pokemon throughout the season. I'm like pretty sure, but yeah, there are some weaknesses. Hopefully I can do well this season regardless with these variables in mind. I do think again that I drafted one of the best poison type teams possible, so looking forward to using it throughout this season, and we will move on to the next team. Alright, and for the 7th best team in the EGC division here, we have the Beans team. I hate it just saying it. This is coached by Bleedall, and this is a monotype fighting team. This fighting team in general, it looks a lot better, I think, than the previously drafted fighting teams. The first thing to note here is going to be, I think, that there's a ton of really good physical attackers, and as a result, the team needs to make sure that it probably has some special attackers as well, but it does. You know, in this team's case, we have a Keldeo, pretty powerful setup sweeper. We also have an Infernape, which is a solid mixed attacker. The next thing I notice as well is we have strong hazard setting and removing potential on the team. We have Great Tusk, which is arguably the best spinner in the Paldea decks, and then Girder as well can also defog to back it up, so it's not forced to run Rapid Spin every single matchup. As for setting hazards, we have again Great Tusk, Infernape, Terrakion, and I think Primeape as well also gets access to Stealth Rocks. And then for spikes, we have Chestnut, can lay some of those down. And of course, when looking at a team like this, where only like 2 of the Pokemon present have attack stats below 100, you just can't deny the raw breaking power this squad has to offer again. The Terra Captains in Girder and Scrafty are also some of the best choices available for fighting in my opinion. I do think that perhaps Terra fighting on Girder could be swapped out. It's a little bit redundant seeing as it's already a fighting type, and I don't know if it's necessarily worth it to trade out like the offensive boons that the same type Terra type gives you for the defensive and sort of setup oriented other types. You know, like if you Terra into a different type and then click bulk up, does that not achieve the same thing? But you know, in terms of defeating type advantages, I think that most of the Pokemon here have some variety of dark coverage to hit both Psychic and Ghost types. You know, a lot of Pokemon here have knockoff. There's like Okidogi, Great Tusk, and Zapdos Galar as well. They all have dark moves, and then Scrafty obviously has stab dark moves, which is good. I think that Terrakion is also a really excellent answer to flying types. And yeah, just really good team overall. The team also has some good priority options now that I'm looking at it. We have the Terra Steel Bullet Punch on Girder, and then we also have a lot of Vacuum Wave users, and you know, overall it feels like this team is definitely going to succeed in cleaning up a lot of endgames if they already have a winning position. So definitely a very good thing for this team. The main area where I believe this team falls short is probably going to be those speed tiers again. Sadly, you know, with Iron Valiant and then Sneasler missing, the fastest Pokemon are Keldeo and Infernape and Terrakion, and I believe they're all tied at base 108. It's very likely that like at least one of these Pokemon on this team will be able to run Choice Scarf in most games. And if need be, Great Tusk can probably also be bulky booster speed, bulk up, and then just sweep the game like that. But yeah, I don't know. Just not very good speed. Another area I believe this team is lacking in is support Pokemon. Inherently, the fighting type doesn't have that many supportive Pokemon, but you know, at the core, this team is just a bunch of damage dealers lumped together onto a roster. The only momentum pieces to maneuver around the game are going to be let's see, U-Turn. Who do we have U-Turn? We have Infernape, Zapdos Galar, and then Keldeo, I believe, gets Flip Turn, and that's kind of it. So I think that maybe one interesting option for this team to consider would be a Pokemon that I'm generally not a fan of this, but I think that it works on this team, and sadly that is going to be Cobalion. Cobalion. I hate that guy. Anyways, Cobalion, it has access to Volt Switch, giving the team another needed like momentum piece. It also has Thunder Wave, which is good supportive move for this team. And again, since your team is so slow, maybe slowing down some of the opponent's team is going to be overall game changing for you. And in addition, it also acts as another Stealth Rocker, which frees up some of the Pokemon like Great Tusk and Terrakion into more diverse sets overall. So that's another good thing about it. Another interesting thing to note about Cobalion is probably going to be its Steel typing, as this makes it a Psychic Neutrality and a Poison Immunity, which can always come in hand. Another Pokemon maybe that could fit on this roster would be like Como-O. It's another special threat, and the fighting type always needs special threats. In addition, I think that Clangorous Souls are going to be super duper free to get off in a lot of matchups, just because the other team, since everyone's so limited with their types, the other team may not have a great phaser or something like that, and especially around the time of an endgame, just getting that Omni boost and then you start sweeping, or you run like Scale Shot and boost up your speed, which also solves another problem, again, that speed that your team sort of struggles with. So Como-O could definitely fit on this team as well. But again, this team is still at 7th for a reason. It's just a bunch of really, really heavy hitters, and it's just impossible to deny the absolute powerhouse that this is. And cap that off with a good hazard game, like I said earlier, as well as good ways to deal with those weaknesses, and overall pretty good Terra captains as well, and you have yourself a really, really powerful Monotype team. I'm excited for Bleedall as he gets to use this team in Season 2 here. And with that, we will move on to the next team here. Alright, and now at number 6 we have the Twin Leaf Town Turtwigs, which was coached by Lostlotl here, and they decided to pick Dark with the first overall pick in the draft, which honestly I can't blame them. Overall, as a Dark type team, there's a number of very, very strong attackers here on this team. We have Protean Mouscarada pick 1. It makes just perfect sense to pick that. And then you also follow that up with Roaring Moon and Weavile. And, these three alone put on so much, speedy offensive pressure that they can probably overwhelm so many matchups, just the three of them. And then there's a bunch of other Pokemon on the team that we're still yet to talk about. So, for example, to support these three, the team has some defensive Pokemon. We have the lack of Ting Lu and a lack of King Gambit, which hurts a little bit. But Mandibuzz in particular is an absolute cornerstone of a good defensive backbone for this Dark team. It can slow U-turn out, it can roost, it can defog, it can toxic, it does a ton of stuff. The absolute escapist in terms of dodging the moveset cuts for moves like defog and roost and things like that, as well as toxic. So there you go, Mandibuzz, the absolute goat. And then we also are backed up with an Overquill, which has Intimidate to further punish physical attackers. And then we also, of course, have Terra Umbreon, which can be very difficult to remove, as it has access to Wish and Protect. And then it can even use a Momentum move in Baton Pass to get in one of those big three. And then there's even Prankster Dual Screens and status support from Sableye, which facilitates a Swords Dance from the Weavile or Dragon Dance from the Roaring Moon behind screens. You just love to see it on this team. Another top Pokemon that we have, I think, is probably going to be that Hisuian Samurott, right? I mean, you get free spikes for attacking. Do I need to say more? Do I need to say more? Overall, there's just a ton of really, really great things to look at on this team. Even if the team only consisted of, I think I've mentioned 8 Pokemon so far. Let's see. Even if the team only had Meowscarada, Roaring Moon, Weavile, Mandibuzz, Overquill, Terra Umbreon, Sableye, and then the Hisuian Samurott, I would put money on this team of 8 having a winning season throughout 7 games. I would. I don't know. Maybe that's a controversial take, but I feel like these 8 Pokemon combined onto a team is just absolutely broken. So really, really good start to Lostlotl's team. However, I do think that there are some possible improvements again with the team. The first thing to note is that there's only one real special attacker here, and that's going to be Terra Houndoom. Yeah, it has access, I believe, to Nasty Plot. I don't see Houndoom a lot, so I'm not sure on that. And then, of course, it's also going to be doing some serious damage with Terra. However, it's only base 95 speed, and sadly, its defenses simply aren't the best, especially on the physical side, where I believe it only has 50 base defense, which is really bad. I think that Houndoom can overall put in a lot of work in the right matchups for sure, but almost every single team is going to have an answer to it in terms of just immediately like outspeeding and revenging it, since it's so weak defensively and it's also so weak to stealth rocks. It's only going to have a limited amount of times that it can switch in, especially since one of the Terra types on this guy is actually fire, so you can't even shed your stealth rock weakness if you are Terra fire during a particular week. On top of that, I think that the spikes and toxic spikes game is very, very strong, but there's absolutely zero stealth rockers on this team now that I think about it. And so there are no ways to chip any non-grounded Pokemon as they switch in, which is a bit unfortunate. Another thing to note is that there's zero stealth rock resists on this team, and even though Mandibuzz is a great remover, its method of doing so is Defog, which doesn't synergize super well with Hisuian Samurott as well as Overquill with the spikes game. And then Defog, or rather, since it's a flying type as well, it's going to be forced into boots. I suppose at the end of the day, there is also a Morpeko that can spin, but it certainly won't be coming to as many games as Mandibuzz is. One of the Pokemon that I haven't touched on at all yet, now that I'm realizing, is Morgrim. And personally, I think that guy's dog ass and he's shit on this team. It's literally just worse Sableye. Sableye is just a better prankster mon. It has the ghost type as well to act as a spin blocker. Morgrim is just here. It's a fairy type, I guess. That's kind of hype, but like, what's the point? It's a Morgrim. It's not like it's going to be doing, big damage, play rough, or something like that, right? So there you go. I guess Morgrim, like, the only reason why maybe you'd want it more than Sableye is it gets parting shot, and Sableye doesn't. But I think that Sableye is just so much better of a mon, like, I don't know. But I'm probably just nitpicking here anyways, because that guy's like 2 points, I'm pretty sure. The real problem here is, again, that the team suffers from is like a lack of stealth rock setting and a lack of stealth rock switch-ins as well, and then a lack of special attackers. At the end of the day, when you have so many strong physical Pokemon like Meow and Moon and Weavile and Hammy, it probably really doesn't matter. You can just let those guys snowball and then win. But just some small nitpicky things that I think that this team could improve on. So yeah. Overall, again, though, this team is just so overwhelming, so well built around the top 3 Pokemon, I think. Again, with screen support and then that good defensive lineup in Terra Umbreon and Mandibuzz and Overquill, as well as good hazard support, again, with Overquill and Hisuian Samurott. I mean, this team is just, it's going to win games flat out and simple. Those critiques that I offered, they're just little critiques for how this team could be improved. But overall, this is definitely going to win some games, and that's why we have placed it so high on this list. So, with that being said, we will move on to the next one. Alright, and coming in at the number 5 spot, we have the Miami Parish Songs, coached by Clumsy Much or Athena, and this is a Monotype Ice team. And onto a type, hooray, that everyone knows has the ability to perform very, very well, as it's the Ice type that Sir Blue used to become the champion of GLCC Season 1. One thing that he preached was that Ice teams only really differ from one another in their middle and bottom tier threats, and as such, we see the return of some of the premier Ice type top threats. We have Alolan Ninetales, we have Baxcalibur, we have Kyurem, which is new, but it basically just replaces Iron Bundle as the premier special attacker. And this forms a pretty respectable top 3, despite missing out on some key threats like Mamoswine as well as Weavile. The presence of Abomasnow as well allows for a secondary Veil Setter, which is good, as it opens Ninetales to have even more offensive roles on this team. I think the second best thing with this team is probably the excellent selection of Terra captains. Everyone who's prepped against a team with Terra Beartic Snow knows that this mon can be an absolute demon. Believe me, I in particular also know this. And in addition, Articuno is a very, very good Terra Captain. It has really, really nice stats overall, and once it gets out of its terrible ice flying typing, it can actually be quite the demon itself. I also do believe that this team does well in terms of having respectable speed tiers. The banning of Iron Bundle really hurts Ice's general speed, but just looking at the speed tiers of the Pokemon from the top down, there's absolutely zero holes. And Baxcalibur and Beartic as well can also just boost their speed between Dragon Dance on Bax, and then slow support, or rather snow support on the Beartic as well. Just coming in clutch there to make it very, very fast. Other middling speed tier Pokemon like Kyurem can take advantage of Choice Scarf, which is also a good thing here. And then, of course, a review of this team wouldn't be complete really without a shout out to the round 1 mascot pick in Lapras. I think that Lapras is a pretty underrated Pokemon this gen. It started out in the 1-point tier, and it's been gradually moved around by a lot of leagues up to like 3, 4. I've seen it high. I've seen it as high as 5. So shout out to Lapras for also proving its worth here. I do think, however, that this team is overall a bit weaker than the Ice type's potential power level. When I started analyzing this team, I was pretty stunned to see that I didn't see any hazard removers, which, it seems pretty critical, as the Ice type is obviously very, very weak to Stealth Rocks. But upon further research, this team does have one remover, but, sadly, the sole removing option on this team is Defog on Frostmoth, which I don't know how much I like that. Had there been an earlier investment to get another form of removal, like Alolan Sandslash, I think this team would be a lot better. Frostmoth, in its own right, does, of course, force prep. It can simply run boots, and, with Ice Scales and the Snow Boost, it can be very, very difficult to stop from setting up and then becoming an offensive threat. But as a remover, I think it's a very, very niche option, and you don't see it every day. And the fact that it's the only remover on a team that is weak to Stealth Rocks as the Ice type is, it's a little bit unfortunate. So there you go. The lack of good removal options is, I think, also exemplified by the fact that many of the Ice type's removers are also like only good with Terra, like debatably good. Cryogonal is probably bad with Terra, and don't even talk to me about Cryogonal without Terra. And then you also have the Avalugs, both of them, which I think are respectable low tier Terra caps. But again, since you're terraing your Articuno as well as what was the other one? Articuno and the Beartic, of course, since you won't be able to afford the Hisuian Avalug Terra, it's probably not worth picking it up just to spin. So yeah, there you go. Two very, very fine Terra choices, but overall it's going to cost you a good spinning Terra Captain. So yeah, Boots Frostmoth, again, sadly, realistically, the only good removal option left on the board, aside from Alolan Sandslash, which you probably maybe could have made a move for later, or made a move for earlier. But it is what it is. It is what it is. I'll stop beating a dead horse here. So there you go. I think that this team, though, is still missing some of the other offensive threats that the Ice type would love to have. Maybe without the round 1 on the Lapras, which I think probably could have waited until the end of the draft realistically. But I respect the hustle. But had that not been the case, maybe you end up with something like Mamoswine, maybe you end up with Weavile, and then you have an even more of a broken team. But yeah, there you go. I mean, it's just not offensively as threatening as Surblues was, in my opinion. So that's a little bit unfortunate, I think, for this team in particular. But yeah, and I think another Pokemon I'm gonna criticize is it's got to be Regice. Like Regice, sadly, it's lost some of its best tools. Like Rock Polish is gone, Toxic is gone, and it can still be very, very difficult to remove because it has like base 200 Spadef, I'm pretty sure, and then it also has the Snow Boost, and then Ice Body I think can heal it up too. I believe it gets Ice Body. It's just overall, it's so passive, and it's very, very passive, way too passive on a team that's meaning to achieve a very, very fast-paced style in Ice here. And so that's a little bit unfortunate as well. I feel somewhat similarly about Glastrier, especially since it doesn't have Terra, but that Pokemon actually does damage. Glastrier does some really, really, really big damage, and so overall I think it's a solid pick. But when the goal of the team is to get Pokemon into positions and win, and that's pretty much what the Ice type's goal is. And then your only real pivots here are going to be U-turn on Articuno. I bet Frostmoth probably also gets U-turn, and then Ninetales gets Baton Pass. Like, this Regice is really just a huge momentum sink, and Glastrier as well is a bit of a momentum sink, so that can be definitely a little bit worrying. But, you know, since Ice is so limited to the amount of Pokemon that it has to choose from, I think the only real way to improve this team would be to somehow negotiate maybe for Sandslash Alola, or drop Terra Articuno as a remover, or rather drop Terra Articuno for a remover with Terra. With access, you know, to options like Rotom Frost, I think that you could gain another momentum piece. You know, Rotom Frost is a Pokemon that has Volt Switch. It's going to keep the pace of the game very, very fast and in Ice's favor. But, you know, at the end of the day, I do think this team is very usable still. That's why it's so high on the tier list. And, you know, just maybe minus like the Terra Fire as well on Articuno because that's still weak to rocks. But just overall a very, very usable team. The top three, of course, are very, very scary. It's just not as good as Ice could be, in my opinion. But just, man, I would not want to fight this team still because Veil offense is always going to be good. So there you go. And the next pick is going to be the Tokyo Tricksters, which is coached by Nice vs Nami. Nice versus Nami. I don't know exactly how to say their name. I'm just going to call them Nami. Maybe it's Nami. Again, I'm not sure. Anyways, they are the electric type team. And I think that after missing out on an electric type team in Season 1, finally having one in both divisions, not just this one, is really, really, really cool. And honestly, both of the teams also look quite good. We're obviously here to only talk about this one, the Tokyo Tricksters team here. And again, just looking at this team, immediately there's a lot of criteria that satisfies a really good, well-built draft team. The first thing that I immediately notice is like the speed tiers here are just beautiful. Regieleki, of course, is like insanely fast, but there's no real holes between any of the mons below it either. There's fast threats like Aleki again, middling speed in like offensive Sandy Shocks or Toxtricity, and then there's also slow threats that can pack like a serious punch like that Iron Hands. In addition, I think that one of the main ways to take down an electric team would be to spam ground moves, but there's two flyers in Zapdos and Thundurus, as well as two levitators in Rotom Wash, as well as the Eel Electros, which is very, very important because I think that having flyers is great, but they're still weak to rock, and a lot of Pokemon with ground moves also have rock moves, and so having these levitators overall makes you a lot less weak to Edgequake, which could be good. And then there's also two Terra Captains that can Terra into Grass in Electabuzz's case, as well as the Iron Thorns that can Terra into Flying, so even more defensive options there. Iron Thorns in particular is like absolutely demonic as a Terra Captain. It has access to Dragon Dance and then Booster Energy to activate its Cork Drive ability. I personally think that it's probably one of the best allowed Terra Captains on the board. Another thing I'd like to commend with this team is there's just so many Pokemon that have very, very strong set diversity. For example, Sandy Shocks can be like very, very strong offensively, but it can also hazard stack and be defensive and body press. Zapdos is the same. It can do really big special damage, or it can be a defensive piece. Magnezone, it can be offensive. It can also be defensive. It fills a very, very important role defensively on this team. In fact, it switches in on Psychic types that threaten hands, as well as Toxtricity. Switches in on Ice types, and it switches in on Dragon types, which is good. So there you go. It can also remove any pesky steals that are getting in the way, but that's probably not super duper important, as it only really frees up the Toxtricity to click poison moves. You also have the whole Iron Hands, so that's another story. But yeah, very, very good here. And then looking at the support, we have Zapdos with Static, and then we also have the Thundurus with Prankster Thunder Wave. which is good in terms of acquiring some very natural speed control. It allows some of your slower threats, namely the Magnezone, that Sandy Shocks, and the Toxtricity, which can be like really fast once the opposing Pokemon get paralyzed, and it'll almost feel like they're as fast as like Regieleki against normal Pokemon, which could be good. As for momentum, so many of these Pokemon get Volt Switch that it's realistically not even funny, so you're going to have a really good time positioning around your opponent's team, especially if you're going against a team that has very little momentum. And yeah, I think it's going to be very difficult to not just be in winning positions constantly and putting your opponents in some mind games here. As for things that I think aren't super ideal on this team, I guess the first thing that jumps out to me is the hazard and the removal options. Iron Thorns has both Spikes and Stealth Rocks, but 9 out of 10 times that guy's probably coming to a game to be an offensive sweeping or breaking set. And so I think the only real hazard setter here on this team is going to be Sandy Shocks. On top of that, the only remover on this team is Regieleki with Rapid Spin, which is unfortunate as well, because that guy's definitely not bulky and he goes down super duper easy. But the situations are generally not caused by poor construction of the team, but rather just limitations of the type as a whole. And since there's so many, or rather so few, like other removers and hazard setters that have the electric type, you probably did about as good as you could with the electric type, just given the options. So realistically, that's not something I can really gripe about too much. I guess another thing though with the team is it lacks the priority moves. I think with such great speed control, it may or may not even matter. But you know, there's an option for Raging Bolt, which went undrafted here. It has Thunderclap pressure. It's realistically not required. I think that this team is already like probably peak electric, about as good as electric type can get. And then of course you already have tons and tons of useful low tiers like Electros and Magnezone and Terra Electabuzz, and you know, maybe it's just not worth getting that Raging Bolt for Thunderclap. So maybe you made the right call, but I guess that's just an option that could be considered. And so yeah, I guess as a result, I just don't really have much to say in terms of potential improvements to this team. You know, I will say that in the event that Morpeko becomes available from Lost Lottle, I think that it can be a really useful acquisition for your team, as it gives you another spinner. At the end of the day, I think that having the option to run an offensive Regieleki without Rapid Spin is probably more valuable than having a Pokemon like Terra Electabuzz, but you know, that's just me. Maybe that's not the right call, but yeah, I think that again, this is just peak electric. This is peak electric. This is about as good as electric gets. So really good speed tiers, really versatile Pokemon, lots and lots of momentum moves. You just can't justify not placing this super duper high on the list, and that is why it is in our 4th position. Alright, and now on to our 3rd position on our power rankings here. It's going to be the Vegas Golden Gallades, coached by Dracagon, and fittingly, this is the Monotype Dragon team. And you know, as a previous Dragon tamer myself, I think that I have a pretty reasonable and like valid opinion on my thoughts with the team. And realistically, my only thought with this team is, holy fuck, this shit's broken. I mean, you have Gouging Fire, Latios, Arcalodon, and Terra Dragalge, which is returning to the lineup. And then you also have one of the pieces that I personally was missing last season in Garchomp. Garchomp offers a really solid speed tier of 102. It also offers hazards in Spikes, which is really important because no other Dragon type in the game gets Spikes. And then there's also this Hydreigon here. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of using Hydreigon myself because, like, I don't know, I just always find that it's slower than I need it to be, and it pisses me off. But you know, it has a super duper massive, I believe it's base 125 special attack, and that like almost mirrors Latios' special attack. So that says a lot about Hydreigon. I'm sure that it's a good Pokemon and I just can't use it. I think it's also important to mention here that the speed tiers on this team are super excellent. Noivern hits 123, which is awesome, and then everything kind of just layers like below it one by one until we hit that wonderful Terra Dragalge at like 40, 42, something like that. And as usual, the breaking power here on the Dragon roster is just absolutely outstanding, both physically and specially. I won't go into that too much because it's just way too obvious. Just look at the Pokemon there; they're gonna hurt. Something I do think to note, maybe on the more negative side with this team, is I'm not a huge fan of some of these low tiers. The biggest culprit that drags his team down a bit from where it could be is, in my eyes, going to be the Goodra, sadly. I don't really like Goodra as a competitive Pokemon in general, and that's again because, guess what? I'm gonna say it. It's a momentum sink, guys. It has no momentum, and I know I've already said that a bunch, and Goodra itself has really, really outstanding stats. It's base 600 because it's a pseudo, and it's super duper fat, especially as well, but I feel that it'll honestly just force switches on the opponent rather than making much progress itself. On top of that, I'm just not too confident in some of the other low tiers as well. I'm personally not a fan of the Dracloak. Like, it's a 1-point Mon, so I'm just nitpicking here. Like, yes, it spin blocks, and yes, it has some like decent support, like it gets screens, of course, but especially without like some means of defensive Terra to keep it alive, I worry it's just gonna die if it's ever brought before it can even provide some value. Speaking of the Terramons, I love Dragalge, and I do also like Dragonair, but Flapple is not really my favorite here. I understand it's probably not coming to many games, but its hustle ability is really the main downside for this guy to me, and I just miss all the moves. That's just me. But yeah, I realize now that I'm just pretty much nitpicking again, but in terms of improvements for a team that's already so broken, I kind of have to nitpick, so there you go. I guess one improvement in terms of something that could be added sort of just boils down to one thing, and again, that's Raging Bolt. I think that Raging Bolt last season for me didn't do a ton offensively. Like, it got like maybe 1 or 2 kills only to like 4 or 5 deaths. But at the end of the day, realistically, it clicked Volt Switch a lot, and it ate an absolute fuck ton of special hits when I needed it to. And yeah, it was just really, really nice. It's basically Goodra in my eyes, like what this Goodra is trying to do, but it also has a priority move, and it also has Volt Switch. That's just my eyes. That's my opinion. So yeah, I think it's just realistically better Goodra on this team. So maybe there's a world where you drop Goodra and some of the other low tiers to try and afford Raging Bolt, but I guess that's just my opinion, right? I guess as another gripe, I can recommend Cyclizar. I mean, I'm just not a huge fan of Defog being the form of removal on that Noivern. I believe that, especially with the hazard stack that Garchomp can provide to this team, you can probably look into Cyclizar as an option to replace it. Both of them have U-turn. Both of them, I believe, does Noivern get knockoff? Cyclizar, I know, gets knockoff, but Noivern might not, and actually, now that I think about it, so you get that option too. I do know that Dracogon has mentioned that he's really not a fan of Cyclizar, and personally I disagree with that, but it's his call. Noivern's still a really, really good option, so I guess, yeah, if he prefers the Noivern, then that's his choice. Overall, his team is already super duper broken just looking at the top, and even though I offered much more criticism to Dracogon's team than I did with the previous team, I do think that this team is better just looking at the top lineup. It's absolutely amazing and very, very well constructed, and I'm excited to see Dracogon give it a go this season. So with that, we will move on to number 2. All right, and number 2, we have the Vegas Corviknights, coached by Zodiac here, with possibly my favorite mono fire team I've ever seen. I mean, I thought that the fire team last season looked really good, and it did impressive throughout the regular season. It was able to make it to playoffs. This team, in my opinion, blows that team out of the water by quite some margin. So every single piece here has a purpose, which is already outstanding. Like, I've said that on some of the other teams, like, oh, this Pokemon is literally just a worse version of that Pokemon, and oh, this Pokemon, you know, it can be dropped for this better option here. But I think that all of the Pokemon here realistically are perfect. You know, there's a ton of hazard setters and removers, which is the removers in particular are pivotal to have on a fire team, as obviously your whole team is weak to stealth rocks. I love Defog Talonflame here. There's also good rapid spin on Torkoal, as well as the Terra Colossal, which, by the way, I think that Terra Colossal is the sleeper Terra Pokemon of the entire draft. I absolutely love this guy on this team. Like, normally Torkoal on Sun, it has to run like Boots, Rapid Spin, Stealth Rock every single game, every single week, which, you know, it makes it super duper passive, of course, but with the defensive Terras on this Colossal, and yes, I'm considering Dark as a defensive Terra here to answer Ghost-type move spam, a Colossal can actually do the spinning and the hazard setting itself, which allows Torkoal to run other sets. And by other sets specifically, I mean Overheat Eject Pack. And that's just absolutely outstanding on this team. Like, imagine you're playing against this team, you know, Torkoal comes out, and it sets up the Sun. And you click a move, like Torkoal probably just lives it because it's bulky as shit. And then it overheats, and you take a chunk of damage in return, which already isn't good. And then the Torkoal proceeds to leave the field with its eject pack, and then you're looking down the barrel of a gun named Cinderace, or Tauros Blaze, or Talonflame, or like the Volcarona's in and it's ready to click a setup move, or there's that whole Solar Power Charizard there. The calcs with Charizard are absolutely insane in Sun, and you know, this is a super duper scary concept, and I think that Zodiac is able to run this moveset way more often than if he didn't have this Terra Colossal locked and loaded in the back. So that's just, it's honestly just fucking awesome. That's just really awesome for this team. Anyways, let's just touch on some of the other benefits here. There's offensive pressure, yeah. There's defensive pressure, yeah. Is there momentum? Yeah. Is there weighted deals with weaknesses? Yeah. There's like realistically very few flaws with this team, and on paper I think that, you know, you can argue like, oh, maybe this is too electric weak, but no, you have the Terra Grass options on the Terra Captains, and then you also have Rotom Heat, which can switch in on electric moves, and then slow Volt Switch out, or can use Will-O-Wisp to punish those physical attackers. And there's even like priority options when you need them, like Cinderace gets Sucker Punch, Talonflame has Gale Wing, so you can get priority Brave Bird one time. There really isn't much for me to say here. I feel like I'm just absolutely glazing this team, but I love it. This team is super duper good. It's probably only second on the list rather than even higher, because Fire as a typing isn't exactly my favorite to build a Monotype team out of. You know, realistically you're weak to rocks, but I can go on my entire Colossal rant again if you'd like, but you know, I'll save you some time. There's so few things wrong with this team that I think it's absolutely awesome, and I think it's the second best team overall this season, which is really, really cool to see a Fire team this high. And yeah, I just absolutely can't wait to see Zodiac use it. Alright, and now on to the number one team, and I know I just said that the Fire type team is only number 2 because it's weak to Stealth Rocks. Well, guess what, the next team is also weak to Stealth Rocks, so I kinda lied in that department. But without further ado, we have the Goldenrod Guard Dogs, coached by Doge the Noob. This is a Monotype flying team, and this team just has a ton of boons going for it as well. I feel like I've said that about almost every single team, but I really do mean it. Out of all 28 of the teams drafted this season across both divisions, only like 1 or 2 of them total are, in my opinion, not usable, right? They don't have something going for them that would make them a good team. It's just realistically me measuring these teams is like, okay, how many bad things are there compared to all of the good things that every team already has? And in the case of the Goldenrod Guard Dogs Monotype flying team, I don't think there's much bad at all. So I really do love this round 1 Enamorus pick. Enamorus in particular is an incredibly versatile Pokemon. It can run a lot of sets. It gets specs, it gets scarf. Those are two of its most common sets. It can also be a contrary superpower sweeper with the physical attack. It can be power herb. There's so much that this Pokemon can do, in particular for Doge's squad here. I also do want to highlight some of the other offensive threats too. I think that Hawlucha and Iron Jugulis's speed tiers are very, very important for this team. As last season, speed tiers were something that the flying team seemed to be challenged for, to be honest. And with these guys on board for the flying team, you just get like a winning position to outspeed everything in some cases, in an end game. And then you just immediately start clicking Dark Pulse or Close Combat, and you're just in a winning position, right? As for the defensive options, we do also have a Terra Gligar, which, maybe you could argue it was picked a little bit earlier than it needed to, since it was round 3 overall, but that thing can be like super duper bulky. It has access to the Eviolite item. There's also a Moltres that can punish physical attackers with a burn alongside a bulky pivot in Corviknight. And then we can't forget the Dragon Dance Sweeper Dragonite here. It has potential to extreme speed as well, so you get that priority option, which is really good. And then you also have Thunderous Therian. That Mon absolutely hits like a tank as well. Very, very spooky. And like genuinely, now that I look at the team, again, like similar to the fire team that I just went through, there's just really not a Pokemon on this team that I don't like. Galarian Articuno as well is outstanding here with Terra. We know from last season how demonic that Pokemon can be. Masquerain has Intimidate, it has Quiver Dance, it has Sticky Webs, and then like even Squawkabilly. Squawkabilly, he has access to all 4 forms, and then there's that one form with Guts. This acts as a status immunity. If you're ever worried about something that needs to soak up a burn, go into Squawkabilly. If Squawkabilly is already burned and it's pretty clear that the opponent is going to click a status move, go into Squawkabilly and you'll be fine. That guy can output like some decently strong damage as well with its stabs. Certainly not a bad pickup for its price point, and given the points that were probably remaining for Doge after he bought all this other stuff and factoring some of his guaranteed things that he got later. The only real criticism I can offer here maybe is going to be that I think this team is probably going to have some trouble picking only 6 Pokemon for some matches, and I'm not too sure that this team can handle its weaknesses like Ice and Electric super duper well. But there's still counterplay to both. With Corviknight up against Ice, and then Gligar up against Electric, you have the ability to take on these weaknesses and still do well against them. So, I understand. One small thing I will say, I'm not too sure what the ground type Terra is doing on that Gligar. I understand it on the Gardecuno for sure. It's an excellent type to break down steals. But Gligar is just normally such a defensive piece that maybe you would want to have a more defensive Terra type on it. Since, just shedding the flying type doesn't make too much sense to me. If you're looking for a rock resist, then honestly just Terra Steel or use a bulky Terra Ground Articuno set, and you'll still be chilling in the rock resist department. But again, this team just has so much going for it that, again, I'm just nitpicking here. I've been nitpicking for the past 6-7 teams realistically, so I think that this Pokemon can definitely this team with a Pokemon on it can definitely make a really, really deep run in the playoffs if it gets the right matchups in its favor. I'm really, really excited to see Doge pilot it, and congrats to him as well for drafting. Again, this is all my opinion, but congrats to Doge for drafting the best team in the Ever Grande City division. So there you go. I suppose I should do an outro now. That was a very, very long recording session, and I'm gonna have to do a lot of editing, which sucks. But if you made it all the way to the end and you watched through everything, thank you so much for watching. It's been an absolute blast going through and starting up a new season of the GLCC Monotype craziness with S Master. And again, speaking of S Master, you can check out his channel it will be in the description, and you will be able to see the power rankings if you're curious for the other division over on his channel. So go ahead and follow him there for some more GLCC content. So yeah, that's probably gonna be it from me. Again, just thank you so much for watching if you made it all the way to the end. It's an absolute marathon, so yeah, I appreciate you guys a ton. It's been a lot of fun, and with that, I will see you guys in the next video.